How's the sound?
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. We're delighted to have so many of you here today. All right. For our presentation from our trip to the West Coast, and we have almost all of our delegation here with us today, so you're going to get lots of really great perspectives. We, from the Energy Transition Lab and the Minnesota Energy Storage Alliance, want to welcome you, and we're hosting this event. I am Ellen Anderson, the Executive Director of the Energy Transition Lab, and my partner over there is Barb Jacobs, who did a magnificent job of making sure this trip went well and handling every bit of logistics. And we're going to introduce our participants in just a moment. I also want to thank Dustin, who's doing the video for us. And for those who are watching online, we will be sending you a link to the slides shortly, but unfortunately they won't be live on the screen. And we will be posting the slides afterwards on our website. Help yourself to beverages and cookies outside. There's a restroom right across the hall. And as I said, we're live streaming this, so for participants, it's important to use the microphone so that we can hear you well. So I'm here to tell you about our Minnesota delegation that had a great trip to the West Coast in March to learn as much as we could about energy storage and microgrids. So I'm going to do a little slide presentation for you, which is a summary of where we went, what we did, and who we met with over 6 days. So it's a lot. I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can. As I said, we'll post these slides for later if you want to dig into them, and it's going to go over where we went and also the people, some of the people we met with. So just some of the high-level takeaways, and then we'll hand it over to our great delegation. But first, let's do introductions. Barb, can you hand the mic over, please? So let's just go down the row, and you can see all of our members, with the exception of Brian Herman, wasn't able to be here. Go ahead, Eric.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Van Meter. I'm the Assistant Director of Utilities Operations here at the University of Minnesota. I essentially look after the Twin Cities electricity, steam, electric, gas, essentially what's delivered to the customer building walls. And we provide technical support for the the system campuses throughout the state.
My name is Joel Tollefson. I work at the West Central Research and Outreach Center, which is an agricultural-based research center. There's 8 of them across the state that's located next to the Morris campus. And we have several different renewable energy research systems that we're putting in to look at energy and agriculture.
Good afternoon. My name is Shane Stennis. I'm the Director of Sustainability here at the University of Minnesota's Twin Cities campus. I work on sustainability integration in our operations group. So the university, as you can imagine, is a big place. We have 24 million square feet of space and 250 buildings, full vehicle fleet, bus fleet, and a number of other things that really have a large environmental footprint. And so we work on integrating sustainability into that practice.
Hi, I'm Allison Hoxie, and let's see, as of July 1st with the Regent's signature, I'll be an associate professor of mechanical and industrial engineering. And I work on energy demonstration projects, resiliency projects, and then some fundamental atomization and biofuel combustion work in the lab.
Hello, my name is Troy Goodnow, and I serve as the Sustainability Director at the University of Minnesota Morris campus.
Hi, I'm Jody Slick. I'm with Equilibrium 3, which is a Duluth-based nonprofit organization. We work on energy transition and resilience, including things like the Duluth Energy Efficiency Program, as well as working with the DOE on solar market pathways. I also chair the District Energy Board in Duluth.
I'm John Tumont with Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, and Jody really is not 6'6", by the way, those of you who know. So you just put my chair all the way down.
Good afternoon, my name is Michael Bluzniak. I'm a staff person with the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. I work primarily with energy facilities permitting and siting and planning, pipelines, transmission lines, energy facilities, nuclear plants, solar, and installations.
Good afternoon, my name is Amy Frederico, and I'm with Excel Energy, and I work on a range of issues including renewable energy and things like storage. I represent the company with Ellen's MESA group, and happy to be here. It was a great tour to be on.
Excellent. Why don't you hold on to the microphone and we'll come back to you in a few minutes. So let me go through the slides here. So here is our group. Sorry, Shane, you're not in this photo, but this was the one day you weren't there. But we covered a lot of ground in 6 days for this trip. And let me start by saying that this trip was made possible by a serendipity grant from the Office of the Vice President for Research at the University of Minnesota, although some of our participants were self-funded. And so, as you can see, there was primarily a university focus with our delegation. We have 3 campuses represented, Morris, Duluth, and the Twin Cities. Energy experts from all different perspectives, and 4 external stakeholders who really helped us have some broader perspectives represented, which was terrific. So the delegation of 12 of us included energy experts with an array of expertise in policy, regulatory, finance, facilities, energy management, and engineering. So really nice broad cross-section. And you can see 12 people, 6 days, 5 cities, more than 19 different kinds of energy storage technology, and a number of microgrids. So we'll get into that in a moment. I'm going to maybe read a little bit from some of the slides just because I want our online listeners to know what we're talking about. So here's a map that shows where we went. I didn't have an animated airplane going from dot to dot, or the big giant red van that we drove in some of the time. But we started in San Diego, and you can see the locations here. I'll go through each of these as we go through the presentation. But we had a very busy schedule. We covered a lot of miles. So the purpose of this trip was really to get all the participants to gain a level of shared understanding and knowledge about some cutting-edge technology and projects related to energy storage and microgrids. And we wanted to really understand their functionality, their advantages and benefits, and their challenges that they face. We wanted to focus on technology, but also on regulatory and grid integration issues in particular. And we wanted to see as many different kinds of technology and applications as we could, but we did have a special focus on microgrid scale projects, but not only those. And we also, according to the grant, were directed to try to figure out what kinds of technology or applications could be good fits for the state of Minnesota, for campuses or for elsewhere in Minnesota, especially in combination with our broad array of renewable resources that we have. So our first, there's the purpose. Our first stop was at San Diego Gas and Electric Utility, and you can see their service territory here is the small dark blue on the bottom of the map, but they serve over 3 million people. So it's a large electric utility in Southern California. They already have 100,000 distributed solar installations in their service territory. So they've been thinking about vehicle electrification, and they've been thinking about energy storage for a while. But then Aliso Canyon happened, and you're all familiar with the gas leak at Aliso Canyon. We're going to talk about that for a minute, because that's what triggered the world's largest lithium-ion energy storage project that was being built while we were there. Although it was only the largest one for a very short period of time because projects are getting built at such a rapid pace around the world. So the Aliso Canyon natural gas leak, I'm sure you all heard about this back in the fall of 2015, a massive gas leak. And California was looking at potential heating gas shortages in the winter and natural gas for electricity shortages in the summertime, and the potential for rolling blackouts in that peak season. And so the Public Utilities Commission in California fast-tracked some energy storage procurement. So San Diego Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison, 2 of the Southern California utilities, proposed a massive storage projects to try to meet that need, and they were built in record time. 6 months time to build these projects, and these are just the SDG&E ones. And they intend to use them to harness large amounts of solar energy, charge when electricity is cheap, and then use it to meet peak demand across the utility system. San Diego Gas and Electric also had a really impressive electrification comprehensive strategy for transportation electrification. We were really interested in that as well, and just some of the key goals that they've set for this, for their utility service area, is to build 3,500 charging stations, which will be owned, operated, maintained, and billed by the utility. They want to do this at 350 different businesses, condos, and apartment locations. 10% of them will be built in disadvantaged communities at no cost. And their strategy goes beyond electric vehicles for individuals, but also to ports, highway charging, fleets, ride sharing, and airport equipment. And we were very impressed by their parking lot, which was filled with a wide array of electric vehicles. So you can see that they are already at 355 electric vehicles owned by their employees, and we saw a lot of them in the parking lot. So next we headed over to the University of California, San Diego campus, where they have a Center for Energy Research as well as a very robust microgrid. And it's truly a living laboratory, a microgrid where new energy technologies are utilized to manage the campus grid while simultaneously being tested and researched. Driving this project is University of California very ambitious carbon goals. Their goal is to be carbon, system-wide across UC, is to be carbon neutral by 2025. The San Diego campus in particular is a huge energy user. It has about 50,000 people on it and 2 medical centers among other research centers. Its peak load is 47 megawatts. And they have an amazing array, as you can see in this list, of different technologies and energy sources. And they also have an operational microgrid with their campus site that's able to shed load to island, to power critical needs on campus, and to supply power to the grid in case of an outage. And here's a nice photo of some of our group looking at some of the battery storage projects and some of the chargers. The Center for Energy Research, we were especially interested in university energy research centers as part of our trip as well. And the director of the center, Bill Torre, said it's one thing to do testing in a lab, it's another thing to do scaled up grid-connected testing. It's a cross-disciplinary research center. They focus on all different kinds of battery storage, including in particular a number of different kinds of long-duration flow batteries. They have received a number of California Energy Commission, which is distinct from the California Public Utilities Commission, grants for infrastructure and demonstration projects, or seed money, that help them to secure DOE grants, ARPA-E, and private industry partnerships where they test their products on campus. So moving on to our next site in San Diego, and this was the Miramar Air Force Base. Any Top Gun fans in the room? It turned out we had some on our trip.
Marines, not Air Force. Marines, not Air Force.
Oh, Marines. Oh my goodness. But that's what they call it, isn't it? No.
Marine Air Corps.
Marine Air Corps. Yeah.
It's not
Yeah. It's not. Did I say Air Force? Sorry about that. My bad. That's important too. It's like mixing up the House and the Senate. Sorry about that. And it's an active Marine base. It has over 10,000 Marine sailors and civilians working on it, and about 200 aircraft on site. It's about a 13 to 14 megawatt peak load, very focused on not only energy sustainability, but water sustainability as well. And the base, like a lot of military bases, requires a high level of resiliency, including islanding capability. So they've been working on 2 different microgrids, and they're still in the test phase of a lot of it. But they had an entire installation microgrid as well as a control-focused building scale microgrid that we learned about. The installation microgrid, let's see, is this my next slide? This shows you just a quick summary of some of the two installations. The installation one uses primarily natural gas, diesel, and landfill gas using the city's wastewater treatment plant and their own solar. $20 million project recently completed, or about to be completed, excuse me, just in the near term. The building level microgrid has a zinc bromide flow battery for islanding and backup power. And they're using it for peak shaving, but they also have run at least one test islanding situation or episode where they were able to use the PV and the battery only, so 100% renewable energy powered microgrid for a few hours, for 6 hours. They were able to black star with it. This was a $3 million project, and they've gotten lots of partnerships, including NREL, Energy Systems Integration Facility at the National Renewable Energy Lab. They've done some testing of some of their scenarios. So just to summarize their takeaways, one of the key takeaways that I got from this is that while they're targeting very high levels of renewable energy to power their marine bays, they also think they may need a certain amount of conventional generation in that mix ultimately. So, jumping ahead, next stop was Sonoma, California. This was the hardship part of the tour, as you can imagine. Yes, a beautiful organic winery and farm with a net zero microgrid. And the owner is very committed to a net zero project there, and to have the ability that he has to finance this made it super interesting. So it's a grid-connected microgrid powered not just by PV, but that's significant. It features solar self-consumption, peak shaving, and load shifting. It's capable of islanding and selling a substantial amount of energy back to their local utility, Pacific Gas and Electric. What's really interesting about this place is that they have an incredible array of technology in a small space. And you can see the photo on the left shows our group visiting the very first Tesla stationary battery that came out of the Gigafactory. They got it. And then an ESS storage system. So they have quite an array of different kinds of energy sources, as well as energy management systems, including the solar PV, a natural gas microturbine, which they hope to run with hydrogen in the near term. They have hydrogen fuel cells at a fueling station, and hydrogen vehicles they're testing, and 6 different kinds of energy storage systems on site. So it's really quite remarkable and super interesting. And as I said, this list of slides will be on our website. Then our last place that we went to visit, the last site was Washington State University. And they also have a very robust energy research center and a program. It's one of the biggest power engineering centers in the country. Looking at Ned, you probably know about this. And they have 13 faculty engineers. I'm looking for my short notes. I have all my long notes here. So they have an array of different systems as well, but primarily we wanted to see their vanadium flow battery that they're testing with Avista, the local utility, and a number of other partners, including the Pacific Northwest National Lab. And they have some state funding as well as utility funding for that. And it's working specifically with Schweitzer Engineering, a local company that's spun out of the university, and using it to provide backup power and power quality for that manufacturing site. And then the Innovation Center itself, besides the power engineering, they partner with industry and national labs on lots of research projects and get funded that way, and they have their own microgrid projects going on. So it's pretty impressive for a small town of Pullman. It's fully equipped with smart meters, and right now they're doing a lot of research on a transacted energy research project. So those are the sites we went to, but now I want to talk a little bit about kind of policy and people, and then I'll wrap up. Washington State we found really interesting because it has a lot more similarities to Minnesota's energy system than perhaps California does. It's a fully regulated utility state. It has very low cost power, but it's mostly hydro there. And they have a lot of excess nighttime wind, and they're getting on their system a lot of solar as well, and they have community solar. So some interesting takeaways from that. Then I just want to go through some of the key people we met with. Jesse Bryson with Advanced Microgrid Systems. Recently, before that, worked for Southern California Edison and was involved in their energy storage procurement. So very interesting what he had to say. He talked about SoCal Edison putting out their first RFP after the California storage mandate was required. And they put out an RFO for 5 megawatts, but ended up buying many, many times that, 260 megawatts, because it was so cost competitive. And he talked about why California needs storage. And we heard this from a number of different speakers, so we have different perspectives on it, but there was a lot of similarities. He pointed out that that month that we were there were 8,000 megawatts of curtailed energy in California, in CAISO, mostly solar. And they have 1,200 megawatts of gas boilers that are slated for retirement. And of course, lots of old infrastructure that needs upgrading, and so storage could be a way to defer some of that. The other takeaway we got from Jesse Bryson is, in his new company, it's all about the management systems, the software and controls. That's really what makes a battery storage system work effectively and optimize its uses. And so they're looking to a model that works with utilities and customers to find win-wins. And that's their business model that seems to be very, very successful. CAISO, we had an opportunity to go to the California Independent System Operator and meet with about half a dozen of their key staff, which was fabulous. And one of the really interesting things about CAISO is that, unlike MISO, which has a footprint of 15 states plus Manitoba, CAISO is more or less contiguous with the state of California, with a few exceptions. And so the first thing we asked them, what's your mission? What are your guiding principles? And they basically repeated the same state policy goals that the CPUC reflected and others reflected. They're all aligned in the same direction as far as policy goals, which is very interesting. And if you look at the picture, we have a picture of California all looking blue, and while this is not a picture from their operations room, which we weren't allowed to take a photo of, it looked just like this, because what they showed us was that at the time we were there on a typical California sunny afternoon, and it's kind of in the shoulder season when it's not really hot, not really cold, it was all the solar was operating and there were negative prices across their market because of so much solar. So it gives you a real life view of that duck curve and what's happening in California. Lorenzo Christoph, many of you may know, he's been to Minnesota a number of times to speak, and he's one of the key staffers who gave us a lot of ideas, and here's his quote: "A lot of it will be learning by doing." So a few of the key points from him is, what are the advantages of storage? Dispatchable resources are going to be needed to manage that duck curve and that ramping with variable renewables as they get more and more abundant. Locally placed storage is going to be more and more important, so that distribution grid is going to be something they're going to want to look at. And he mentioned pumped hydro. He stressed the importance of figuring out what your system needs are, not choosing a technology, but figuring out what the system needs, especially heading into the future, and try to find the technology that best provides that function. And he talked about, similarly to what MISO has said, that the distribution system is really a black box to the ISOs. They haven't really had that level of granular information before, and there's a need for them to get that information now. Finally, our last speaker, or our last person that we met with, we were very privileged to have a meeting with Commissioner Carla Peterman and Mike Gravely. Commissioner Peterman was the lead commissioner in the California Public Utilities Commission on energy storage, and Mike Gravely really leads a lot of the work at the California Energy Commission, which does a lot of research and a lot of funding of different projects. So they shared with us some of their key takeaways and lessons learned, and I'll just give you a couple of my favorites. We talked about filling in the duck curve, they mentioned that. Commissioner Peterman talked about the need to integrate renewables, to reduce distribution cost, upgrades of distribution infrastructure, and to help meet California's greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so what happened in California was the legislature directed the commission to look at setting a target for storage, which they did at 1.325 gigawatts. They intentionally included all scales of storage, so The bids were required to include some customer-sided distribution and transmission level. And they built in a lot of flexibility for utilities, and it was intended to be sort of a methodical 2-year process, but then Aliso Canyon happened, and the governor declared an emergency, and they expedited the procurement process. I think, let's see, where's my quote? Here we go. Finally, lessons learned. Commissioner Peterman said the demonstration projects that they had in California allowed me to have the confidence to set the storage standards. So that was a really important takeaway for me, was that California, and Mike Gravely said the same thing, that the experience that California had in planning for the implementation of storage, planning for grid modernization, and demonstrating a lot of the technologies made them have the confidence to proceed with this. They felt like they were ready, so they had the background. They had done the groundwork. And they mentioned how important it is to have funding mechanisms to help build those pilots and to research pilots, demonstrations, as well as research projects like the University of California, San Diego. And last but not least, Mike Gravely said electric energy storage has been so successful in California that the market is maturing dramatically, and utilities are now pushing for additional storage beyond the mandates. So I'm going to stop there. That's a lot of information, and I hope I have left you all something to say. I'm sure I have, because we have a lot of really smart people. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to our panel, who I know you want to hear from. So who wants to start? Who's got the microphone? All right, Amy, are you okay with starting us off? And so we're going to just have them answer 2 questions. First question, roughly, what are the top 3 things you learned on the trip?
Well, thanks, Ellen. That was a great overview. It was fun to see that again. One, Ellen mentioned some comparisons and contrasts with the different states that we visited, California and Washington, and some of the similarities with Washington also being vertically integrated and some lower energy prices. And so I think some of the things that were interesting to look at is how the states had funds that were available for certain projects, had asked the utilities to talk about what they need to learn, what they would like to try out, the demonstration projects that Commissioner Peterman mentioned, and then kind of partner with the state in the ways to figure out how to implement those projects. Some of the underlying technology, the software and the hardware, the advanced grid, grid mods, and the things that Minnesota is starting to work on. California and Washington had started a few years before us, and so they had some of that underlying infrastructure available already, and so they're perhaps a few years ahead of us. As well as, I guess I thought one interesting thing that I learned, a takeaway, was that, I can't remember who said it, it was a good quote, but that storage doesn't always decrease the carbon footprint, but it depends on, of course, what the underlying grid mix is, and so I think, that's heartening that in Minnesota we continue to decrease our carbon footprint, and so it makes storage reduce its carbon footprint. Am I answering both questions, Ellen?
No, one at a time.
Okay.
We'll come back for the
Sounds
second
good.
one.
Thank you.
Thank you. One of the main things I think I took away from the visit was just the sheer number of different types of projects that are being undertaken throughout the state. It was really quite eye-opening to leave Minnesota on a cold March day and wake up in California and it's nice and warm, and people are working with solar energy and their VHVs running around being powered by the sun. There's a lot of programs that are going on that are pilot stage, proof of concept, and mature, all occurring at the same time. And there's a lot of opportunities for those things to occur. But the second thing I think was probably more eye-opening, at least from my perspective, and that was that there's a huge synergy once these systems begin to be integrated. The storage as part of the microgrid is kind of the secret sauce, if you will, to enable higher penetration of renewables, in particular with combination solar and wind resources that we might take advantage of here. And finally, that there's an extreme amount of complexity in relation to the challenges and opportunities within each of these various technologies that are out there, in particular, some of the regulatory burdens, some of the pricing issues, the economics, and of course, working through all the logistics to get these projects going forward through the various agencies and so forth are part of that. And I think that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Mike. You know, for me, I knew this when I was going into the meeting, but the storage is not one thing. It's not monolithic. It really is a whole bunch of different technologies and a whole bunch of different uses, and it's amazing. You know, we typically think of a battery, and that's what you think of, but storage is more than that. And even when you talk about batteries, it's more than just a lithium-ion battery. It's a lot of things, and that was just kind of seeing the hands-on and seeing the different technologies. I mean, I didn't know they had iron flow batteries. I thought that was kind of cool. We could have the iron range go backward because of iron flow batteries. But that was kind of interesting to me, is actually seeing all the different technologies. And that really raised the question, the struggle that we have as regulators as to how do we value these resources, because they're just so different in so many ways. You know, we passed a renewable energy standard. We knew we were going to get so much out of wind, and we knew what wind was going to be, and it was essentially, we knew what it looked like. You just don't know what storage is, and I think that's where we really have to get to the concept of what can we define it as, and how do we use it. It's not just, it needs something to be with it. It needs a grid, it needs another energy source, it needs something, and how that combination works together is a struggle for regulators. And probably the third thing I learned is, don't try to eat Amy Freggergell under the table, because there was 4 of us big guys, and she put us under the table when we were out to eat. So if she's ever in a hot dog eating contest, you bet on her.
I don't know if that falls in the what happens in California category, but I guess the gloves are off now. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be looking at the different technologies, the different models, and kind of the ecosystem that surrounds the different models from a finance and from a regulatory point of view. Coming from a community side, having been involved in post-disaster work and looking at how we look at energy resilience at a community scale, it was helpful to see not only the variety of the technologies, but where and how people are able to, either through regulation, through incentive structures, et cetera, look at monetizing the value of resilience. And I think as we looked at a wide variety of models, I think that was really helpful. Where is the utility investing behind the meter to look at grid resilience, and what does that mean economically for those customers where some of that storage is placed? How are there kind of greater opportunities for looking at adding batteries and having the batteries add value into their renewable resources? And I think one of the things that when we're in the position of kind of observing the negative power pricing, for so many years in California, when we've talked about some of their energy resilience, part of that has been because there's been a drought and they haven't had as much hydropower coming online. And we were there in the spring in which there was a whole bunch of rain. And so now you add where you don't have huge loads, you have a whole bunch of hydropower coming on, and now you also have all of this solar and other renewables. And so just thinking about the wide variety of variables that can be impacting how our grid is working, who the winners and losers are in regards to the financing of some of these technologies, and how can we monetize that resilience aspect of storage and microgrids.
I appreciate that what you said there too about being in that room, seeing all this negative energy, hearing about all the the energy that could have been put onto the grid, and you're like, at some level, this isn't about a shortage of energy. There's a lot of energy to go around if we could figure out how to put it out there. Some of the takeaways I took away, number one was just the power of going on an interdisciplinary trip with people and the relationship building that happened to be on a trip with all of these people, and how, I don't know how innovative that is, like to get all these perspectives at one time. And because it's a systems related problem, maybe it's obvious you would just bring lots of different people, but I don't think it is. And so I think this is just one really good example of bringing all these people together. You know, I think the Climate Smart Municipalities project in Minnesota is another example of that really cool interdisciplinary relationship building. I guess another point would be, I really appreciated the California perspective. I think I heard about universities as being trusted partners in doing this work, and Ellen had mentioned about the extent to which the California government viewed that research as helping to set targets and priorities, and that they viewed their university partners as trusted testbed folks, right? And that was very inspirational, right? And impressive research going on at California and Washington, and you couldn't help but think, you know, Minnesota can really be a place, like, you know, we could be the place, right, for doing this kind of work. I guess more in a more complex level, there was something too about, it was exciting to see how fast this was changing, a little bit of Wild West, but also a question of whose incentives are being optimized in all of this complexity. So wherever people were trying to get in at different parts of the system. And so how do you think about that in Minnesota as we're building out? How are we thinking about those, since we have a chance to learn from what other folks have done, how are we doing that? And obviously there's not, I think you alluded to, just seeing how many different technologies people were using to optimize. So it isn't a silver bullet thing. We use this metaphor all the time, right? It's silver buckshot. But to see the silver buckshot in action, and then the winery was like a classic example of that, where, you know, they had the means to do all of these things, right? And that was really impressive. But I guess maybe a last point was to see that the technology is developing. So a real take home. I was going on the trip really thinking about Minnesota. You know, Minnesota's cold, right? And so some of these technologies really work in a California context, and that's great. But what could work here? And so it was great to see, for example, Tesla or lithium batteries working. But it was also exciting to see a actual utility using a vanadium flow battery to try to manage multiple benefits. And that's really my concluding thought was, it sure seemed like the entrepreneurship and the challenges are going to be around the controls, right? And you guys mentioned this a little bit, but the controls around not only just you know, operating the technology, but then layering it on top of the incentives that each state has to basically optimize your financial return, but at the same time to think about which batteries work best for specific functions, and different batteries have different performance. And so, you know, maybe I can say more later about the Morris context.
Here, come back and follow. No, I actually want to build on a little bit of what Troy said as far as the demonstrations and also the you know, where Minnesota can fit into this work, because I think that I had the thought that going out to California that they were going to have a lot of this stuff figured out with their demonstration projects, and then we would learn, okay, this is what we need to do this back home. But in truth, they're really at the early stages of a lot of this research, and in many cases we found that they couldn't, like the Tesla, the first battery, it was not operating because they couldn't figure out how to talk to it. You know, or the one at the Marine base, they just ran for 8 hours, and that was the demonstration, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to move forward with running this 24/7. So California is doing it currently, but they're still really at just that beginning cusp of the research, and I really want to stress the point that just because you're doing a demonstration project doesn't mean that, you know, this is just technology off of the shelf, that everybody knows how to work with and play with. A lot of the research is going to happen from doing these demonstration projects, and I think that's where these comments by like CAISO and from the commissioner, that a lot of the learning is going to be in the doing, and Minnesota can really be still in this, can be helping answer a lot of these questions about how are we going to transition to a new energy infrastructure. And for sure we have the weather questions where, like, you think the best place you could even demonstrate this is in 70-degree, constantly sunny California. That's a little different here in Minnesota, but I was surprised by how rich the research field is still in this area, especially in the flow batteries, which for me personally is a great multidisciplinary problem that I could see researchers at the University of Minnesota system really digging into and working on.
So I just have two things I think to add to what has already been said. And they go back to some comments that Ellen had highlighted in her slides. First is, they seem to have a really clear sense of why they're doing it. What's the problem they're trying to solve? And that's broadly shared by lots of people working in the industry, but also outside of it. So, and I'm not sure that we have that yet here. I think the people in this room probably believe that storage is really important, but I wonder if we were to go out to other people working in the power sector, let alone the general public, how broadly that perspective would be shared and how well understood that need would be. And the second thing is, when you saw these comments reflected from Lorenzo at CAISO, kind of trying to be agnostic about technology and defining what the need is, and then finding the technology that best suits that. And really not being too wedded to one particular approach or another. And I think those were just kind of two real critical and key points that I got out of the trip. I joined the group halfway through, so I did not get to spend time in lovely San Diego, where it's always sunny and beautiful. But the rest of the trip was great, and I think it really, we learned a lot, even in the short period of time that I was with the group. It was a really eye-opening experience.
Well, these guys have all brought up some great points, and I could kind of go on and say some of the same things, but I think overall one of the big things I thought that was really kind of refreshing was just the enthusiasm all these different groups had for looking at storage technologies. And I know part of it was because there was definite economics involved. You could see a profit with some of this technology, and a part of it was because they'd had problems in the past, and they knew that they needed to look for solutions. And the people we met with, granted, were probably the people who were really into solutions, but I think overall they understand that the technology and the solutions are there. They just need to go find them. And I thought that was pretty refreshing that a lot of these different people were doing that, and I think they were doing it pretty successfully. They're not there to where it's fully implementable yet, but they're working on it. They're working hard, and they're doing a good job.
Tough group to follow. I don't know that I can add a whole lot more than what's been said. But I take a little different perspective on this. I come from an engineering side and the utility system operation, and looking at application from my business side of things. And first off, it was great from the interdisciplinary team approach. Otherwise, I'd have never had a chance to have some of the candid conversations about some of the difficult, or different positions on things, okay? And how it comes back to economics and the old causation, okay? Who's generating the expense? And it was quite eye-opening from that standpoint. San Diego Gas and Electric and the state of California to take advantage of the basket of lemons that they had to deal with the gas leak was pretty impressive. And how quickly they were able to take and get through what would be 2 years or more just from a legislative and commission standpoint, to get through it in 6 months, to come up with a working mechanism to address the needs that they had to deal with. Just being able to serve their customers on peak was quite impressive. So in the process of that discussion, things were flushed out of what did those commissioners have to deal with, the different perspectives. What did the leadership in San Diego Gas and Electric, who was overseeing the whole storage aspect, what did they have to deal with that they could make things work? It's quite impressive. So I've got some fresh ideas on how to look at things as we come back to the state of Minnesota and here at the university itself as from an energy storage standpoint.
All right, great. Well, why don't you hold that mic, Eric, and you're going to be in the enviable position of going next again, probably. So as long as we're doing it this way, we'll go back in the other direction. So the next question we want you to address is really what did you see or learn that you think has applicability to Minnesota or relevance to Minnesota? What do we take home from this trip?
Well, let's talk about the university and where it's going from an energy standpoint. I didn't know this made such a big hit that it did. My napkin drawing.
So I should have made a slide that had a picture of him drawing a picture on a napkin when we were out at dinner one evening, and I was like, you got to talk about the napkin. So here it is, live.
So the University of Minnesota, for those of you that don't know, we're just in the throes of commissioning a new CHP plant to help cut our carbon emissions and also set us up for a better approach on our microgrid. And we're going to be supplying a good portion of our electricity from this cogen system here on campus. Well, here's what we've got. We've got a system that's going to be designed, that's not designed, it's already started delivering all of our baseline power. Midnight, noon, back to midnight. Here's the load profile, and here is our load for the campus. So now our impact upon XL no longer is as good a power factor as it was before, or load factor, I should say. So where's an application for us for some energy storage? Is right here. This piece. When we hit those peak hours, when the price is the most expensive for us as a consumer and for the utility to take and either generate, produce, or go out and buy on the market, the energy storage provides us an opportunity from an economic standpoint to take advantage of that. So there was my crypt napkin.
So I guess my big takeaway is, and I've seen this before in some of our Minnesota systems, but on a much smaller scale, we have a lot of different potential solutions that can work in Minnesota, and I think we saw them demonstrated. We will have to do some adaptations for our state, but we saw some really cool technologies. And I think one of the coolest ones that I saw was the piece that Jesse Bryson did. And that was all about how to manage all these things. And that is a huge issue, is how you can control what's coming onto a system, what's going off of the system, what's getting stored for a peak demand, like is on that graph, versus what's going to be just generally available. And I think they're starting to address some of those control issues. And the company that he worked for, they were planning to make their money off of how you address those control issues. And I think that is one of the biggest, hardest things. And our control will be different. I think we have one more question, and I think I might answer that one at the same time. But Minnesota has a much different load profile. We didn't talk specifically, or we didn't show you the picture of the duck curve, so I don't know how many of you know what the duck curve is. But it's basically, California has these days which are entirely predictable. So when you see their load demand and their production of solar energy, it's very predictable, and there's a duck shape in there. So that's the duck curve. Minnesota is totally unpredictable, so we need to have much more robust control software and controls for all these different things and integrating them. And so I think that is a cool area to be.
So I guess the point I had made earlier about the why, being clear about the why and the what, I think is really my key takeaway. But the other thing I would mention, piggyback and steal some of what Troy said about the university being a trusted partner. The university, both the academic side as well as the operational side, is interested in partnering, I think, with organizations in the state and outside the state on this question of storage. On the operational piece, though, we're looking for a partner who can, bring the technology to bear, because we're not funded operationally for these kinds of demonstration projects, and we're not, really staffed to do them without some support. So we're really looking to be that place. but understanding that we need to have partners who can help support that work and be involved in that, and that the university can be a resource in that, because we do have a large microgrid and a large campus and a large load, and so we're a really good candidate for demonstrating this at scale.
So I think I'm going to kind of reiterate what I said before and also what Shane said, is that I think that from my perspective, the thing that Minnesota could take away from this, or that we could really work on, is these, or the critical need is these demonstration projects. And not only just for the rich research questions that are involved with the demonstration project, but then also giving people the confidence to invest in this technology and to know that it's going to work for them when they need it to. I was just recently at the National Adaptation Forum conference last week, and we did a presentation on a small project that we're doing in Duluth with solar plus storage, so a lithium-ion battery, and just the amount of basic information that people still need yet on energy storage, like lithium-ion batteries, like simply how big is it, how much space do I have to have for it. That's really the low level of what these demonstration projects can provide. And another thing on the high level is that at University of California, San Diego, they got this seed money to start these demonstration projects, but as soon as they had like the beginning infrastructure to be able to test these technologies, then big research money came in from DOE and ARPA-E and from industry. And so when you I think that traditionally we don't think of research in terms of big demonstration projects. We think of it as like lab scale, new discoveries. And so I think maybe there's a real opportunity in Minnesota to switch the way we think about our research on energy and the transition we're going.
The importance of concrete pads.
Yes.
We learned, yeah, right, is if you have a concrete pad, it will come.
Yeah.
But you gotta look open for business, right? So I think maybe just a couple things about the Morris community as we're thinking about as a team, how could some of this relate to Morris? So the University of Minnesota Morris is in the city of Morris, which is a city of about 5,000 people. The campus is home to about 2,000 people. So we're about half the town. Our square footage is about 1 million square feet. But we're a city within a city. And what's really cool, I think, about the Morris example is we have a lot of energy data about our small city. And if you haven't been to Morris, I assume you've all been to Morris. No, I'm kidding. But I hope you will come. I hope you will come and visit Morris. Morris is a really, really unique place in that, in one place in Minnesota, you can see wind turbines, biomass gasification, solar thermal, solar PV, green buildings, anaerobic digestion. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening in Morris. And, we're excited to see Morris as a model community. So if you go to morrismodel.org, you can learn more about some of our work there. But from a battery storage perspective, in a spring day, and I'm looking back, 3 of the interns from the Office of Sustainability are here today. One of the interns on the project, Sydney Bauer, who's in the room, raise your hand, Sydney. She's got binders of materials that have been part of the Serendipity grant. So Sydney's got her binders that were a product of some of the Serendipity grant work, which we're appreciative of. And you might say, well, Troy, of course you've been looking at all of this data all along, and when you're peaking, and what time of day it goes on, and you're, over time. No, we weren't actually doing all of that. And so what's really fun is people are asking for some of Sydney's work, and we'll be continuing to do that. But on a nice, spring day, we might be at about 1,400 kW peak. But as we move towards August, we're peaking probably around 1,900 kW, so 2 megawatt versus, what did you see, 24 megawatt peaking at the, I can't remember, do you see 24 megawatt peaking at the Twin Cities campus? But but the opportunity for us, with the wind production we have, there are periods where the wind shuts off, and so we see a little bit of this kind of thing. So a big question for us is about 40% of our bill at the Morris campus is peak demand charges, and the other 60% is kilowatt hours. So that's a big deal. So is there some way we could actually push down that peak demand stabilize that for the next 25 or 30 years. And that's not even getting into, we really need researchers and others to help us think about the integration of all of these technologies that we know are available, right? But then also those financial incentives that layer on top of all of that. So we could talk at length about that as well.
I think that's an interesting point, and one thing that I took from California is that I think in a lot of ways Minnesota is very much thinking the same things that California is thinking. The project that Dr. Hoxie mentioned earlier, which was a solar plus storage project, what she has been doing with some of her research students is looking at this SunVerge battery at a community center, a nature center in the city of Duluth. And what has been fascinating about that as we talk about peak shaving and being able to reduce your costs, is she's looking at how do you optimize software such that you can reduce that overall demand charge. To the point where it might even be possible for this small community center to move off of demand charges altogether. That's a huge benefit to that facility. But as we looked at in California, because of things like Aliso Canyon, et cetera, there is that secondary monetization on just the overall resilience side. The project that Dr. Hoxie worked on with Equilibrium 3, the city of Duluth, and a whole bunch of other partners, was a battery that actually was delivered 2 hours after power had been restored to the facility after being out of power for a week because we had a huge blowdown in Duluth. And so figuring out kind of the value of resilience and storage for that nature center, the fact that they ended up having to cancel some of their summer programming because they didn't have power for a week, that was a net loss of about $14,000 just in income. That goes a huge way to actually having paid for a battery project. And so when we're looking at energy plus storage, I think when we think about Minnesota, we have to figure out where and how we can kind of layer some of these benefits. And some of the research we had seen, for example, in Pullman, was the utility very involved in figuring out at the distribution side where their loads are and how they can protect their customers and at the same time use that to kind of harden their grid. And so where are these opportunities and where are we having the conversations between utilities, between regulators, between communities, so that the choices that we're making are returning kind of maximized values. And I think, you know, it's a question that we're going to have to continue to ask moving forward. One of the projects that had been conceived a couple of years ago in response to HUD's National Disaster Resilience Competition was looking in the city of Duluth of potentially putting up solar and doing storage for our water pumping. Put them on, you know, solar panels on a reservoir, be able to then have, be able to island and have emergency power to do water pumping. And we think to ourselves, well, that's never really been an issue in Duluth. Well, it only took a year before we were within 2 hours of not being able to pump water in the city of Duluth because of this storm. And so I think those, you know, we had some amazing models that when the ecosystem is right, when the will of all of the different parties are right, they can put together an amazing storage project and get it done in 6 months. You know, move over the regulatory hurdles, move over, you know, the financing hurdles, move over the engineering and siting hurdles. And so the question is when and how do we create maybe some of those pathways that don't take something like an Aliso Canyon. And I think that'll be an interesting conversation moving forward in Minnesota.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. I think for me as a regulator, I'm trained to be skeptical. That's what I'm here for. And so when you see stuff, you always have to look at things with skepticism. I did realize that a lot of the storage technology that is being sold, and of course I have nothing against Tesla, but they're good salesmen. There's some things that are still maturing. That's one of the things I did learn and take away as we look at the Minnesota system, that there's still a lot of maturity going on in the storage area. one of the interesting questions that was raised early on in the discussion for those that were part of the energy regulatory situation, someone asked the question, why are they doing all these crazy, great things in California? And our comment back to them was, well, they're not vertically integrated and the cost of their energy is high. So I guess the solution for Minnesota then is we'll become not vertically integrated and we'll let our prices of our energy go way out through the roof, and with the potential of rolling blackouts. And then we solve that storage problem. Well, that's not going to happen. It's not my job as a regulator to let that happen. We are very different than what is California, but that doesn't mean storage doesn't play a critical role. And I think as a regulator, one of the things that I walked away from that those visits was, here in Minnesota, we have to decide, what do we really want? What are we looking for? Storage is not something like the renewable energy standard. Let's get so many megawatts of wind. We really have to start with the question, where can we get the most value here in Minnesota in our system? And in a vertically integrated system, we have to work with Xcel, we have to work with Minnesota Power, we have to work with Otter Tail, we have to look at some of the innovation that's going on at our cooperatives. A lot of our cooperatives are, no offense, Amy, are a couple steps ahead because of just a different structure. And so we have to start asking our questions, what are those things that we think we can use here in Minnesota that will make the system we're building more successful? Obviously to me, we are going to have a lot of excess energy at some point. Is our primary focus going to be capturing some of that excess energy to reduce the need to build more other gas facilities or things like that as we go forward? What are the things that, as we look at our system here in Minnesota, what are our needs? What are those things we value, and so put some priority towards those? And again, I'm still first and foremost an economic regulator, okay? My job is to keep your energy rates low. You can thank me later for raising your rates, because I just did. We just adopted an agreement raising your rates if you're an Xcel customer, okay? Not too many people, I'm sure, are going to come up and thank me afterwards, okay? I haven't got a lot of good warm fuzzies in my emails about raising your rates. So my job is to keep the rates low. And so if we're going to do something, either energy storage is going to have to show us it is the thing that keeps our rates low, or the legislature or some entity is going to have to come up and say, here's some money to try some things out that fits within the system, okay? Otherwise, there is not a motivation to do that. So the legislature or the RDF fund, if it's still there in a couple weeks, those are things that where you're going to have to say, here's some of the things we can look at that make the system work, that marries itself quite well with community solar, or works really well with all that wind that we have out on the Buffalo Ridge. You got to come up with those propositions for us. And if we can do that, we can start putting some of these demonstration kind of ideas into effect. But again, when you come to the commission, the first and foremost thing we're going to look at, how does it benefit Minnesota? How does it make sense financially going forward? And that it's just the way the system is designed. That's my job, is to be kind of that, I guess, wet blanket in the room sometimes when it comes to some of these great ideas that sound really good and engineers get all excited about. But in the end, I got to ask somebody to pay for it. And that's the tough thing that we have to figure out. How does it add value to our system? We should prioritize those things in Minnesota, because there's so many things storage can be used for. What are those things? What are those priorities that we want to use storage for in Minnesota?
Thank you. We didn't compare notes ahead of time. I had virtually the same thing to say, far less eloquently and articulately.
And long, it's locally.
But I think John hit it on exactly the same point, and I think Jody as well, that we need to look at the pathways for seeing these sort of projects find a way into existence. The business case for things like storage and microgrids are not very well defined. A lot of the values that they add are not easily captured and identified and described in a number that's easy for commissioners to digest, and members of the public and the legislature as well. So a lot of the work that needs to be done is kind of looking at those sort of questions as well. The work that we do within our unit in energy facilities typically deals with large-scale projects of 50 megawatts or greater, transmission assets and so forth, dealing with the ISOs and others, and seeing the projects go through their proceedings. However, a lot of the projects that we were looking at here are things that are very small scale, again, and tend to go somewhat under the radar. And in particular, as it relates to storage and things like that, they're again, very hard to capture and present. There are a number of different studies that the Mid-Continental ISO have undertaken to identify and look at how these things are going on. At the commission itself, we've looked at this from several perspectives. We had a meeting last week, for example, where staff came together across several different units, which doesn't happen very often, actually, and look at our roles respectively in relation to distributed generation. And it was kind of enlightening there too, as well as some of the people I'm working with, working on very similar sort of questions. We have people who are looking at it primarily from a rate design perspective and trying to establish means of integrating those questions as well. Community solar gardens, we have interconnection standards, interconnection work groups, both on the state level, as well as participating with the IEEE and the MESA, other acronyms, on the electrical engineering side of things to try to find ways to make those a bit more standard as well. So there's more questions than answers. Again, it is an early sort of time in this adoption. I think this will go on. Decades from now, people will be coming back probably talking about these very same things. So there's lots of questions out there to be answered, and hopefully we'll get there.
Thanks, Mike. In terms of opportunities for Minnesota, I'm actually going to blend my thoughts on this question with, I think Ellen had a last question about opportunities for utilities that need to step out early. So I'm just going to, they all kind of relate anyway, but when one of Ellen's slides, she talked about San Diego Gas and Electric and their goal to have EVs reach, I think, 500 staff people by 2025, have that many cars. And just in general, the electric vehicles, I think, are a huge opportunity for utilities, and a lot of, there's a lot of folks thinking and talking about that amongst stakeholders in Minnesota and around the country, of course. And so I think that's got a lot of wheels turning at Excel, and we're looking at, what is the best way to engage there. So it's good to see a counterpart in California working on that as well. Commissioner Tuma mentioned, what are the services we're looking for? What are the values we're looking for storage? And that was one of my really big takeaways for Minnesota and Excel in terms of defining what are the value streams and the services for the storage system. I learned a lot about the various 6 major buckets of the storage services that can be provided. And we're doing some work in Colorado actually right now with a couple of pilot projects where we're stacking value streams for some projects we're doing at the Denver airport in partnership with Panasonic. And so there's some state funds that are available through a fund called the Innovative Clean Tech Fund, ICT. And thanks to those funds, as well as DIA, Denver Airport, and Panasonic, which has sort of invested in a system out there, we have some anchor tenants that have decided to step forward and work on a pilot out there. And so I think my understanding of that project is that it's the first of its kind in stacking value streams. And so I think that's one of the things that can really help these projects be cost effective in Minnesota, to the commissioner's point about economic regulation. So what is the best value you can get from these projects? And that relates to my last thought, which is that when there's opportunities for kind of whether it's a company or a data center or some type of anchor tenant to step forward and say, I want to try this, I want to learn from it, I want to partner in some way. That's where you saw a lot of the projects out west. Somebody's really invested in them and kind of been a cornerstone there. And so I think, Joel mentioned that, or Troy mentioned that the university wants to be a trusted provider and partner with these projects. And I know at Excel Energy we feel the same way, and we really are there for our customers to talk about what are their goals with their projects and their energy goals. We've got stakeholders at St. Paul working on the Ford site. We've got folks in Arden Hills working with Rice Creek Commons, and there's some visionary documents that stakeholders have pulled together where they've they have some thoughts about future microgrids or future storage and exploring what might that mean for those communities. And so we're kind of partners along the way to learn with them, and so we'll see how those unfold.
Great, all right. Well, I don't think I'm going to ask another question. That was a really great summary. Whoops, wrong microphone. Hey, what am I doing here? We're going to take some audience questions for the last few minutes, and Barb will come around. So just raise your hand if you have a question, and please wait for the microphone if you would. Oh, we got several.
Great discussion. So you touched on that there's very similarities between Minnesota and Washington State. In fact, all my money went to Washington State. My daughter was a student there. But anyway, Washington State has a lot of municipal, like Seattle City Light, but also investor. Minnesota is a very heavy, outside of Excel and Minnesota Power, very heavy co-op. Can I get some comments on how structure-wise the two are comparable or not comparable, and how storage, the Commissioner kind of talked on this, but how storage would fit in the co-op versus municipal investor setup?
Sounds like, who wants to address that? Anybody? We'll pass this one out.
Thank you. I'll take a stab at it, but you'll have to accept the fact that I'm not a rate analyst at all. I try to be blissfully unaware of a lot of the accounting mechanisms that our folks look at. My understanding is that the co-ops provide the Commission some opportunities for enabling distributed energy resources that larger scale IOUs don't have. So larger scale projects might best be suited to be addressed by IOUs in the larger groups, whereas distributed generation, community solar gardens, and those folks can be acted on a bit more nimbly by the co-ops under the PERPA regs and things to develop their resources. Is that answering your question?
Well, it's more from a policy standpoint, where you've got you don't have the co-ops in Washington State, but they're able to get the folks in Olympia to fund things like the various projects. So I'm just curious, because from a policy standpoint, what's the delta between the two?
Well, I think the big difference is a co-op doesn't necessarily worry about rate of return. They don't worry about kind of the economics of where the energy comes from. They worry about how much they're paying for energy. And so what you see is a lot of co-op and co-op boards are motivated not to buy energy. And so they've been thinking of creative ways already in Minnesota around, for example, water heaters. And really, water heaters for several of our co-ops is their storage tool they use in a lot of ways, because what they do is they turn the water heaters off, they have control of them, their members give them control of them because their members realize that means they're going to pay less for their energy, and they directly see that connection because it's part of their community. And so they realize if they can turn their water heaters off during the day, during the peak, all of a sudden they don't have to buy as much expensive energy during that peak time. And so because of that economic motivation that a cooperative may have, they're going to be a little bit more innovative, and they're going to see the value of some of these storage options that are there. And no offense to my Excel friends, but under the way we do it, the kind of vertically integrated investor-owned utilities, and I have no problem with them. They have their own innovations that they can bring to the table that are a little different, but the bigger and better they build it, the more expensive they can build it, the more rate of return they're going to get on that, just as the way the regulatory structure works. And so we get a little nervous if we see a real expensive battery, and Excel did make a proposal. I got to be careful not to talk about any specific dockets, but they did make a kind of proposal that way. And the question is, are we really learning something of value here from this battery? It seems like a very innovative project, but and Amy mentioned it, we got this project in Colorado that's doing similar to the same thing. Can we just wait till you finish that before we spend the money here in Minnesota? And so the inclination then for us regulators is to kind of wait on some of these innovations to see somebody else try them out, where a co-op says, hey, let's give it a try. We might save some money here, and we can do it on a smaller scale, and so we'll take a little bit of risk to save money with some new innovation. And so just the nature of the regulatory structure, you get a little bit more reticence from the regulators to want to spend money on innovation when you're an IOU or an investor-owned utility, where sometimes smaller co-ops can be a little bit more nimble and are willing to take a risk on some of these newer technologies, and that's what our co-ops are doing. It's just the nature of it. Doesn't mean one's right or one's wrong. It's just the way it works out.
I have 6 questions.
Professor Mohan.
I'll ask only one. I'll tell you the others. So just to elaborate on Commissioner Tuma's point of view, what you mentioned about co-ops. So I have a student working at GRE. It's made up of co-ops. And I just talked to him that there's something like 300 megawatt under their control. Okay, and if you can shift the load for 2 or 3 hours, and you have 300 megawatts, you're talking about 600 to 900 megawatt hours. And that would be the size of a battery of IDS tower. Okay, so that's a lot of storage. So, one of the questions you asked, what are we looking for? So we're looking for something for nothing. And that is one of those things, getting something for nothing. So I think, so my question is that in California, we are in Minnesota, we are all above average here, right? So did you see any of that in California, where they are doing demand side management?
I'm going to answer one real quick. One of the models that we had seen that I thought was interesting, and I think is one of those things that has informed very much this idea of where we're going, is really on the control side of things. And that was Jesse and AMS. They have a system in which they are putting battery storage in behind the meter, and they're trying to figure out with the utility, it's a utility project, going to different customers that have the ability to site. It can be related to kind of their distribution grid, et cetera. They're putting the battery storage behind the meter, and then they're controlling and optimizing for the utility that energy. And I think that was a really interesting conversation, because when we've looked at things behind the meter, we're often looking at that for the customer. How are you doing things like reducing your demand charges, et cetera. And so to me, it was an interesting model when you have the utility owning the storage behind the meter, and who is the main client there. And that really is kind of the utility first, and then the actual host site second. And it was just one of kind of the many models we talked about. The other thing that they're looking at in California is really now, as you integrate EVs in, how is that going to be done? And that's really looking at this ability to be able to communicate. And one thing that I was surprised at, you have this huge duck curve, which I think by the time we left, we were calling it an ostrich curve or a goose curve, because it's pretty huge in California. But right now, your EV charging rates, you are the most expensive energy to put into your EV is in the middle of the afternoon when they have all of this overproduction. And so I think that's going to be one of the things that as we look forward in the next few years, is how are we integrating vehicles into the whole idea of storage.
Okay, well, you answered part of what you said was exactly what I was going to say. And bringing up the model that AMS had was really cool. It didn't just look at battery storage, though. It took all sorts of load management in. But the really cool thing was they could integrate these different technologies along with CAISO's real-time pricing data, which is something we don't have here. And so they could get a price from the whole system and integrate their demand side management and do it all in one package. And the software tool was pretty slick. And I think that really is one of the directions we need to go.
A question and a comment. My first comment is, Mr. Goodnow, you remember we met several years ago when I toured your campus. At that time, I said, you're really short on you're not having your students participate in this program. And I'm hoping that and the University of Minnesota does not you have a large physical facility, but you don't have student involvement. If I look for a graduate in electrical engineering and I talk to him, he knows nothing about real plant management. And there needs to be an integration of the academics with the actual physical plant. And I've been to your site, and it's beautiful, but I didn't see the students.
You bet. There's 3 of them right there, but
But
that's just
that's-
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. We're on the same page. Lots of work done.
Yeah, I'll just say that during the summer, we take their students and we're right next to them and we bring them out to our side and we do a lot of energy research with them. But in general, you're right, we want to get more students involved.
Anybody who's involved in energy, mechanical engineering, or electrical engineering should be doing these real operations. Thank you. I wanted to just comment that in 2003, I did my first battery integrated energy storage system on a building. But energy storage in buildings, which we call energy management, has been going on. I've been involved in it since the late 70s, all the way through the 80s and 90s, and today it's still going gangbusters. And the battery is another tool that they can use. I've sold to companies, and it's hard to pencil. If I could get some way of going across the meter and pick up some value stacking, my big selling point is I can reduce demand. In one system, the demand reduction is the most significant portion of their energy savings, the battery-based demand. But to your comment, the battery wasn't the size of the IDS tower. The battery is actually quite small because I just had to clip those short periods, and my capacity was significant, but my energy demand was low. And I had a lead acid battery that lasted for 10 years. And,
Do you have a question?
Okay.
We should move on. If someone else has a question. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, let's just take a couple more, please. In the last 5 minutes. Thank you.
Well, I guess my question would be, do California or Washington State, for that matter, offer time-of-day pricing for power, and that could obviate the need for some batteries?
And I believe Commissioner Peterman said that will be the default moving forward in California very soon, will be time-of-use pricing. For residential.
Industrial cluster already on that.
And I know we've had some real innovation in California because they have faced some very high prices, so those are the perfect places to implement things. We've had things relatively stable in this state, so that would be an exciting place to see what time of day could really do.
Hi, Mark Ostrom, Next Energy. Looking at the bulk system, the overall power system, especially here in the MISO footprint, I get concerned about conflicting motivations, and because we have a pretty well-functioning market, not perfect. We're still figuring out how to do DER and storage aggregation, really bring it into the market. But that becomes a very, very cheap way of providing an awful lot of services, that are alternative ways of doing the same services you get from storage. So I get a little concerned, like in California with negative pricing, and that's just a symptom that they don't have a large enough and flexible enough market, and they have a lot of self-schedule that won't get out of the way, right? So we have a lot of advantages here. I mean, how do you see the viability of doing this as opposed to using low-cost flexibility from the market or other transmission upgrades and so forth when we look at storage?
Who wants to tackle that?
He's in the marketplace all the time.
All right.
Yeah, there's no doubt what you're speaking has a lot of truth to it. I think we have to remember that IOUs are in the business to take and generate revenue for those folks that are invested in the utility. So I agree with a lot of what you have to say, but there are those spot applications. And just, again, I come back to that San Diego Gas and Electric one, where it was the least cost alternative to the customers to take this approach to deal with what they had. Otherwise, their infrastructure upgrade costs.
There's always inefficient spots.
That's right. So there is no one size fits all. You're going to have to look at all the variables to make a good, sound decision on how how to approach it. So,
That's a great, Andy, oh, go ahead, it's not the ending point. Go ahead, Troy, jump in, please.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that I guess we really didn't mention was that there was a lot of analysis going on behind the scenes, that they had put a lot of time in. And so they were looking for those value spots quite a bit in the system, even though we didn't necessarily talk about that.
But I think one part of your question is whose incentives are being optimized. So I think about Morris, those two turbines generate 10 million kilowatt hours a year. We use 5 million, the other 5 million go back to the power company. 40% of our bill is peak demand charges. So in terms of whose interests are optimized, I would really like to figure out how to optimize our interests as long as we're going to have peak demand, if we're going to keep having peak demand charges now and into the future, as one perspective. And then we hit on a bunch of questions about rural resilience and resilience in general and how that gets built in.
All right, well, I think we're out of time. Let's thank our fabulous delegates. I'm so glad everybody could be here, especially from across the state of Minnesota. Whoops, sorry. Yes, Michael.
Quick housekeeping note, there's recycling and garbage right in that back corner over there. And on your way out, please take extra pop or cookies or anything else that's left. Thank you.
Please sign in if you haven't. Thank you so much for being here.